Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Kelly Holochek, Director of General Services. And with Council, I'm just giving you a little background. With Council's approval, the City of Waco executed a contract with CST Fleet Services in October 2021 to provide consulting services for a fleet vehicle replacement plan. This project kicked off in November 2021, and a stakeholder panel was put together, and it consisted of city staff as well as 2 members of the Sustainable Resources Practices Advisory Board. So CST, in partnership with Ecopreserve, evaluated our current fleet makeup and the operational needs for those vehicles across the city in order to provide recommendations for what our ideal fleet size and makeup would be, best practices for the procurement and financing and disposal of vehicles, and to propose strategies to improve environmental sustainability. So this plan is also intended to provide a strategy for the potential conversion of city fleet to electric vehicles, taking into consideration light, mid, and heavy duty, as well as charging infrastructure needs. So at this time, I will hand this over to Ron, Randy, and Rebecca to walk through their presentation with you.
Good afternoon. I'm Randy Owen, and I'll kick off our presentation. CST has been in business since the year 2000. Staff have completed over 500 fleet studies. Our focus is on helping fleet organizations provide more efficient services to their internal customers. So that's the departments in Waco who use vehicles and equipment to provide services to the residents of the city. So I'm Randy Owen. I've been a fleet manager, a city fleet manager, a county fleet manager, an electric utility fleet manager, and a consultant for the last 20 years. Ron founded CST in 2020. Before becoming a consultant, he was a fleet engineer in the trucking business. And Rebecca and her team are experts on alternative fuels, electric vehicles, and electric vehicle infrastructure. So we brought them in on this project for that piece of the study. We'll talk here about fleet utilization. The first part of our study was to look at how vehicles were used, if there were opportunities to right-size the fleet by increased sharing, if there were vehicles that were no longer needed, as evidenced by low miles driven every year. And we had extensive interviews with departments to understand how they use vehicles to achieve their missions. The second part of the study, Rebecca will talk about the Fleet Electrification Plan. An earlier speaker was right on when he said that electric vehicles are clearly the future of the fleet industry, the future of all of the vehicles that we'll be buying in the future. There's no question about that. I think an important thing to consider is our approach is a measured approach to advise the city as vehicles come up for replacement to consider which vehicles are feasible to make electric this year, next year, and the following years. Our mission was not to advise you on how to electrify your fleet tomorrow, so just keep that in mind as we go through our recommendations on the phase of the study. The fleet replacement plan, I will lead us through and talk about costs involved in replacing the city's fleet. And I'll turn it over to Ron now to talk about the utilization phase of the study.
As you guys probably already know, the city of Waco has a very diversified fleet. You have a little over 1,800 vehicles. This shows a graphic summary of them. You have sedans, SUVs, pickups, small equipment. Actually, fleet has about 254 categories of vehicles that they keep track of these vehicles within. When we looked at the age of these vehicles, we noticed you have a lot of vehicles in the green. That's good. Within 20 years old, it's easy to get parts. When you look at some, when they start getting beyond 15 toward 20 to 20 plus, these vehicles typically become more unreliable, harder to get parts, more downtime. So that was a concern of us and the team. And when we looked at the reliability of them, that was an issue. And that's one of the things we looked at in looking at your life cycles. We looked at your purchases. This is your past purchase for each year. You were purchasing, if you're if you have 1,800 vehicles, you probably should purchase about 180 vehicles every year on average. You guys were a little under that. We also looked at your capital. To replace your current fleet would be a little under 100 million. Our calculation, I think, was 97 million approximately. With that, you'd be looking at spending about 9 to 10 million each year to keep the fleet in its current shape. As you look at these numbers, we haven't been spending as much, so the fleet's getting a little older, it's getting a little aged. We want to try to bring it back into reasonable life cycles that actually save you money. We also looked at the utilization. We got each vehicle and looked at, is it being used effectively? There are some in the red conditions in yellow that aren't used as much as we'd like. Some of those are special use vehicles, and that's understandable. But anyway, that targeted vehicles that we looked at when we met with fleet, when we met with the using departments to talk about the mission of each of these vehicles and how we could do it better and what our options are in moving forward. We created a scoring system for the vehicles, how good of shape it is, how much it's used, to come up with what we call the keep, replace, share, or dispose model. If a vehicle is being used and is in very good shape, well, we need to obviously keep that vehicle in its mission. If it's in poor condition but being used, well, we need to replace that. If it's in good shape but not being used very much, we need to consider sharing that if we can to get more use out of that. If it's not being used and it's in bad condition, we should just get rid of it. And there was a category that's not enough data. For example, we have trailers, we're not tracking those. We really don't know how much they're used. You may have a generator out in the field. We don't know. We interviewed the departments and made the best guess we could. But we use these models as a basis for a lot of our discussions and interviews with using departments, talking about what type vehicles they could use, what they might share, and what they might get rid of. That led us into our electrification plan, and that is Ecopreserve helped us go through to look at each of these types of vehicles, the missions, and specifically if there was an electric vehicle that is available today, which is a key point. And I'll turn it over to Rebecca.
Thanks, Ron. So first we wanted to start with an overview of the alternative fuel vehicles that the City of Waco already has in their fleet. City of Waco began purchasing alternative fuel vehicles a little over a decade ago, focusing on the E85 or ethanol flex fuel vehicles. And then back around 2019, you introduced your first electric vehicle, and then in 2021 and 2020, you introduced 44 hybrid vehicles over those 2 years. So currently the fleet stands at 89 ethanol vehicles, 4 EVs, and 44 hybrids today. This has resulted in a decrease in fleet emissions over the last few years. So this is about a 4% decrease since 2016, which is pretty good, all things considered. We also wanted to show you all a comparison of the City of Waco fleet percentage of alternative fuel vehicles compared to regional data from consumers in the area. City of Waco, your fleet is in line with the large city areas around and their general populace makeup of percentage of people who are owning and operating EVs in their homes as like residential owners. So the city is, in our opinion, keeping in line with the trend of EV adoption rate. There's opportunity to improve as always, but in terms of how Texas and Northeast Texas is going as a whole, you guys are staying pretty well in line with the general area.
Let me ask you this before you move forward. Mm-hmm. In this slide particularly, is that, so what you have of the other cities and areas were all registered vehicles, and our comparison is the City of Waco itself or the City of Waco?
The City of Waco fleet was that green bar on the graph.
That's just our fleet that
registered vehicles in the City of Waco is around 0.23%, which if we go back one slide, yeah, if you see that last bar, that other we would fall,
Area.
the city of Waco falls in that other area. We're slightly higher than that for registered vehicles in the city, outside of the city fleet. So city fleet has a higher percentage of EVs than city of Waco does as a general populace.
And what about these, because and it's not a fair comparison because you're comparing large metro cities, and I get why. I'm curious as to know what those city EV uses are as well. I mean, because if we're going to compare them city to city, fleet to fleet, I would need to know what that is because, I mean, Austin's going to have more EVs, period, because it's just the way it's built. And the emphasis is higher on sustainability in electrifying vehicles as a whole. But I'd like to see what the cities are doing because, if I'm comparing our work, I'm comparing our work as a city, not the people as a whole. So I need to see that a little differently. But go ahead.
Okay.
I'm going to just quickly interrupt you to over your homes. I'm definitionally confused by in your write-up in the package of materials, you're talking about the fleet. I'm trying to figure out the difference between fleet, vehicles, drivable vehicles, and registered vehicles. And you define fleet in the write-up as 820 or 1,820 units. Is that right? And then later in the write-up, you say the 1820 includes chainsaws and pumps and generators and fans. So can you, I guess I need a breakdown of when we start moving to vehicles where you have very defined, terms, what is it? How are you differentiating fleet from vehicle? Just help me follow along.
There are three terms. The first term is fleet units. That is the number of pieces of equipment and vehicles that are tracked by fleet.
Okay.
Okay, so they have a record for each one of those.
820 of those.
Okay. Well, no, 1,820.
Right.
The next item is drivable vehicles. That has a steering wheel, it has wheels, it has a motor on it. And then the next level.
How many of those are there? I guess, help me out.
I don't have the number right off the top of my head.
Okay.
But
that's the kind of the analysis we're doing around the vehicles. So it's hard for me to follow along when we say there's
884, is that right?
200 of this, and I'm trying to get the denominator.
884 is what the script
It
says.
may-
884?
yeah, I don't have my models right in front of me. That's probably a correct number. The other number that is listed in the report from this graph here, to get the comparison, we looked at the registered vehicles in the state of Texas. And that's where, like the Austin area, Houston area, that's where these numbers come from. And we specifically compared those against the registered vehicles of like types for the city of Waco, which is sedans, pickups, and SUVs.
So in the graph that shows the red bar to the far right of age of vehicles in years, and we're showing, 280 some, right? What is that? 288, 83. What is that? What is the total? Was that the 883? But then I see 884 tracked,
Specifically to
450
vehicles.
by hours. You add those two up? Or is 883 the number of vehicles?
884 is the vehicles, so you have to take out, if I'm right, y'all do your job. 1820 is all of it.
Yeah.
So take that out. 884 is what we're talking about vehicles. Now, 28 plus is, or 21 plus is the 283.
Yeah,
Because that's
okay.
drivable equipment.
That's what I'm thinking too.
My B plus mind said that we're gonna call a unit anything that takes gas, because that's where you would get a generator or a chainsaw, because I can't imagine driving a chainsaw.
Can, but it'd be very
Not comfortable.
long trip. So 884, that's what I'm thinking is the right
Correct.
number of vehicles?
Correct. And where that comes from is when you're dealing with fleet, they look at a unit as anything they have to track.
Okay,
If you've got a trailer, it doesn't take gas, but they
Right,
have
right,
to track it.
Right.
If you have a generator, they have to track it.
Gotcha.
So it's 820 units, so. And we can make that clear. We can make those.
Okay. And I'm totally I'm empathetic. This is a draft, so I don't want to start totally picking it
And
apart.
being a fleet person, sometimes when I read through it, I understand it, so I think everyone should. It's my apologies.
Yep.
Okay, we'll get back
We're gonna
to,
get
back
to
to EV.
So focusing on our drivable vehicles that fall within the categories of sedans, SUVs, and pickup trucks. As a whole, there are, and I'll backtrack over to the slide in just a minute, but as a whole, there are around 600 vehicles that we are talking about, that we looked at from an EV perspective, that fall within the sedan, SUV, and pickup truck category. So just clarifying that.
600.
Looking at charging infrastructure, so right now, City of Waco, you have existing EVs, you have some existing EV chargers. Right now you have 7, 4 are located at your operations center, 1 at your EMIT building, and 2 are located at your water office. There's also a number of chargers that are publicly accessible located around town, around 10 level 2 chargers. So these are the chargers that are going to take 6 to 8 hours to charge a normal sedan vehicle. And you have 28 level 3 chargers that are technically listed as publicly available. These are the ones that are going to take 30 to 60 minutes to charge a vehicle. I will caveat that with some of these chargers are limited specifically to Tesla vehicles. And that when we're looking at charging as a whole and charging infrastructure that's available to the city, we can look at these publicly available chargers from a reliability standpoint, but we shouldn't rely on them fully in order to move over to a fully electric fleet. So we would want to focus on city-owned property and city-owned equipment in order to refuel these vehicles.
Yeah, because it was a bunch of, like, if you looked at and broke down where the charging stations were, I mean, if you're not staying at the hotel who has charging, or if you're not a specific dealership that has limited hours. So I know that there were some challenges there. Now, asterisk to throw a bone, I did read the article yesterday about the state extending or creating a way to electrify the major highways, if you will, by placing charging stations every, 50, 70 miles. So there is something that is outside, even outside of what we do as City of Waco, that could assist in that process. And that would be state land, and that would be something that would be accessible at a greater and longer period, because I'm assuming it would be 24 hours, because it's feeder road, whatever. I don't know the timeline for that exactly, because what did it say, 5 years?
I think that was
Somewhere in that.
within 5 years.
Okay, but I did see, I was like, yes, but the station's available here. Please continue.
So with all of that being said, in order to support the plan that we have recommended so far, we would need to add an additional 44 chargers to the City of Waco over the next 10 years. Obviously, this would need to go prior to vehicle acquisition, so that once you get the vehicle in hand, you have the ability to drive, operate, and continue to charge it. So that timing would need to be coordinated between purchasing and your how you're installing the infrastructure. Moving along to the actual recommendation. So we identified, you have currently 4 vehicles. At the time of this study, I believe since then 3 have also been added within the last few months. 54 of those vehicles that we looked at out of the 600, we identified through these interviews with the departments and with the fleet managers, were eligible for some sort of alternative fuel application, whether that was a hybrid vehicle or an EV. Like I said, 4 are already being replaced or have been replaced recently. So of the remaining 50 vehicles, we've got 29 pickup trucks, 16 sedans, and 5 SUVs that we would target for replacement over the next 10 years. We have on this slide just kind of a breakdown of when that would be happening. This is based on the life of the vehicles and how they're being used currently. There's a little bit of a front loading in 2022 simply because we're playing, as Ron and Randy alluded to earlier, there's some vehicles that are a little bit older than we would like to see them. And so we would want to replace them sooner rather than later in order to get them back into a usable life cycle that we think is appropriate. Because there's a high number of pickups, we do recommend first moving towards hybrid vehicles. And I say hybrid, not plug-in hybrid. And I want to clarify that distinction, that hybrid vehicles do not require electric charging infrastructure. They have regenerative braking that allows the battery to be recharged, and so you don't have to plug the vehicle in overnight. And that's important because you can start to transition your fleet to hybrids without putting in your infrastructure first, which can save costs. And hybrid vehicles typically have about 25% reduction on greenhouse gas emissions compared to their normal combustion engine vehicles. So it's a good bridging step while you're working on getting the infrastructure installed to switch your vehicles over to hybrids, if that's an option and if it seems like there's a good like-for-like vehicle that you can move to for that use case. So this is just a graph of how those transitions would happen over the next 10 years. It matches similarly to the table that you saw before, just in a different layout. And I'm speaking quickly for time. The last couple of slides are just talking about the recommendations. So we would recommend putting telemetrics into your EVs just to track, the battery health, how they're being used, how they're being, are we reaching points where we have range concern for these vehicles, things like that. We also recommend that you reevaluate the market. You've heard this from other presenters and you've heard this from us. It's changing so quickly in terms of available vehicles, available infrastructure, technology. So about every year or two, we would recommend re-looking at these vehicles to say, okay, well, it wasn't eligible and we didn't think there was a good replacement option now. Will there be one next year? Will there be one in 5 years? And then the last recommendation was to continue to explore vehicles for conversion. Again, we make the recommendation in the report that you should consider vehicles for hybrid replacement if they are not right now identified as having an EV counterpart. And with that, I will turn it over to Randy to finish this out.
Great, thanks. After we considered right-sizing the fleet and the additional capital that's required to buy battery electric vehicles, we baked both of those into our fleet replacement plan recommendations to you. So as Ron said, to replace all the vehicles in your fleet would be around $100 million with a reasonable replacement cycle average of about 10 years. Means you should have been spending around $10 million a year, and you have not, and therefore you've fallen behind somewhat. So when you look at this table here, the catch-up, so we have our first recommended, you need to spend around $9 million in 2022, but we have some deferred catch-up to do of about $5.5 million, which means to keep your fleet in appropriate age groups, you need to start spending around $14 to $15 million a year, which will fund your regular replacement and the additional cost of electric vehicles, as well as get rid of those vehicles that are over 20 years old, that are costing you extra repair and maintenance dollars, they're not reliable for the folks who are trying to use them to perform their duties. So that's the essence of our replacement plan, and you can see over this period that we drive the average age of the fleet down from 13 years to under 10 years, and that's where you want to be. You want to have the average fleet age down under 10 years.
But can I
Quick
ask
question.
a question?
Oh, go for it, Alice.
All right.
No, you're good.
We're talking just about pickups, SUVs, and cars. Are we talking about the big equipment, that, like our trash trucks and all of that?
Yes,
I
ma'am.
don't see that here. Where is that?
This replacement plan includes all 1,820 vehicles and pieces of equipment in your fleet. So this includes trash trucks, police cars, trailers. The electrification.
I know you said trailers don't fall into the whatever, because trailers are pulled or whatever. But I was just wondering, I would like to see the big equipment separated and tell me how much it's going to cost for them. The great big ones, the trash pickups and trucks and all that we as citizens see out in the street more so, the fire trucks, the big vehicles that we don't see out in the street that much, but we do see the trash pickup, which would concern me a whole lot if my trash is not being picked up today, because
Yes.
my truck is being charged up.
Yes, ma'am,
somewhere
excellent
or
point,
something.
and our
But I
full.
need to see that separate, please.
Yes, ma'am. Our full report has replacement details by type of vehicle. So how many units per year, at what cost, what replacement cycle for trash trucks, for fire trucks, for police patrol vehicles. That detail is all in our.
Well, I didn't see that here, and that
That's not what we
concerned
got
me.
though, right?
Yeah, that was not presented to you guys.
Yeah.
We went vehicle by vehicle with fleet, so they have individual spreadsheets on every single vehicle you guys have. So we have that level, so bringing it up into some category for you, we can do.
Kelly, what is our average spend? So if we're, the replacement says that we should be, spending this, what do we spend?
About $5 million per year is
Okay.
what your historical replacement dollars have been. It's
Right.
ranged from about 3.3 million to.
At the highest
6.5.
was just 6.5.
Yes.
Okay.
And you're talking about police cars, trash pickup,
Yes, ma'am.
trucks, and all these
All-
big, heavy
everything.
equipment trucks.
Yes, ma'am.
Total
Not
fleet
just
spend.
SUVs and pickups and sedans, which I was thinking, the way this presentation was, the way I was thinking that's all it was.
Focus on the electrification phase of the report because those are the models that are currently available. There are viable alternatives for sedans and for SUVs and emerging alternatives for pickups. So the Ford F-150 Lightning took 200,000 reservations. They made 150,000 of them in this model year, so 50,000 people are not going to get one this year. Next year, they're going to make another 150,000. They'll take reservations starting later this year. The first 50,000 will go to
last
the
year's
reservation people who didn't get one. So but what that means is, in practical purposes, you cannot buy an F-150 Lightning this year, next year. You might get one in 2024.
Okay.
We need that information.
Well, and that's the thing, because, a lot of times if it says, it's available to order, and I know we have to, we are charged with making the best decisions for the future of our city, and we have to begin in shifting thought, for sustainability. We know this. I think where we run into the crisis is, our need is advanced beyond what we can lay our hands on. Now, I would like to see a plan from fleet to prepare better, because if we need to get on a wait list, we need to get on it now, because we will always be in the rears if we don't go ahead and do something.
Yeah, that's why, our recommendation is every year at budget time, you need to consider this. You need to prioritize electric vehicles. But you also need to be realistic about what you can actually get into your fleet. All the ads are nice, shiny new toys. It makes it sound like you could go down to the dealer and pick one up tomorrow, or 2 or 3 if you wanted them. Well, you can't. It's just, now 5 years from now, that may be a totally different story. There may be an oversupply of electric vehicles as Dodge and GM and Tesla come on board. But right now, you
Council
have to
members?
walk.
Yeah. Council members, we'll be glad to split up that information for you like you requested. And I also can put together kind of a bullet point list for you of those challenges we are hitting when ordering electric vehicles, because we have tried to order several more and we're not able to get them. And I can put together some of those instances for you all.
That would be helpful, because, we all are pulling the same line. And,
Sure.
And I think we're all in the same messaging of what we want to see.
Sure.
And how we get there. And even in the conversations we were having in DC, doing so correctly, because moving ahead too swiftly without proper infrastructure is going to be a problem for everyone. Now, is it true that maintenance will go down? Of course. The way the beauty of our advancing technology, if we go ahead and start making those shifts, but we've got to look at it really hands-on and not in this ambiguity that we've kind of been, because y'all know stuff and we, clear points would be incredibly helpful for us.
I would like to put together a list of our efforts as well as the why those orders have not been able to go through. I'd be glad to do that for you.
The tough thing we're addressing now is advertising is fantastic for electric vehicles. according to the ads, you can buy one, down the corner. Truth is, you can't. These list of questions on the screen, is it in production? Is it available? i.e., can you go down the street and buy it? Is the manufacturer reliable? We don't want you guys to get on the bleeding edge. There are some manufacturers out there that are going to fail. Where do we take this vehicle to get it fixed? Some are local companies that are one location. Historically, that hasn't worked out well. The fleet shop, can it support this vehicle? And what's the total cost of ownership? These are things that's important to me, being a fleet person. I want the cheapest, most environmentally friendly vehicle there is on the road. I would love for everything to be electric today. I would be happy, but that's not the case. It's not there.
I've got
wish it was.
a question that's somewhat related. I'm involved with another entity that has mostly sedans, gas sedans, and they've gone from purchasing vehicles to leasing those vehicles because they say it's a fixed cost, that it's more manageable. You know that it's going to stay within certain boundaries, as opposed to, we've joked before that we've got vehicles out there with tape decks and CD players in them in our fleet. Sounds like a lot of them based on your study. Do you recommend leasing? I imagine for EV, it's just as unavailable as it is for purchasing, but y'all are fleet experts. Is that something we should be thinking more about or not?
I'll take that if you don't mind, right? So leasing, think about, you can lease a car 12,000 miles a year, 3 years, turn it back in. Mm-hmm. Well, you can't do that with a city vehicle. You have multiple drivers, 12,000 miles a year. Think about your police department. That is not enough miles for them. When you turn a lease vehicle back, every little thing that's wrong with it, you're going to pay for. Extra wear and tear, they call it. Typically, the leasing companies will not do business with municipal governments under that traditional retail lease model. Leasing for governments really is debt financing.
Okay.
So when you hear an enterprise, for instance, who wants to do business with the city, they're really talking about a long-term financing approach for you.
Okay, so it's not common because it is not a great functional model for
Correct.
municipalities, is what
Correct.
you're saying. Thank you so much. That's
You
very
bet.
helpful.
We're going to try to wrap up real quick so you all can get
Yeah.
it right.
We might
We
consider.
can just skip these. There were some ancillary recommendations. They're in your package. You can see what they are. And with that, we appreciate your time. And I know you have other things to get on to. And we're around as we finalize this report. Any other questions, we'd be happy to answer. If you relay them through staff, we will answer them for you.
Awesome. Thank
Thank
you all
you.
so much for your report.